if that investigator is determined, and if the investigator really wants to. I'll tell you later on when we have more time about what Larry did in terms of getting up on the 6th floor of the Blue Book Depository when the court order saying no one would go up there other than authorized certain people and so forth, and about what he did in the Tippit murder. He's generally recognized in the research community as being the foremost authority on the Tippit murder. Larry Harris.
Welcome to Dallas. This is my hometown, and I was 11 years old when President Kennedy was assassinated. And I was 24 years old in 1975 when I decided to get actively involved in researching the Kennedy assassination. And now it's 1992, and I'm 40 years old. And, starting to feel it too after 17 years on this case. But if you told me back in 1975 that in 1992 at age 40 I would still be involved in working on the Kennedy assassination, and it would still be very much a topic of great interest and active interest in that subject at this late date, I just could not have foreseen that. But if we ever learn the truth about the Kennedy assassination, if we ever get to the bottom of this thing, it will have been in spite of and not because of the Justice Department and the FBI, because the failure of those agencies, the refusal of those agencies to honestly and aggressively investigate the Kennedy assassination and prosecute in the Kennedy assassination. Those agencies have been criminally negligent in their handling of this case, and their inaction and lack of prosecution and thorough investigation have only served to perpetuate what I think is one of the most grotesque lies ever told to any nation by their government, and that is that Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, carried out the assassination of President Kennedy. In 1979, the Congress of the United States, after a 2-year investigation, issued a report concluding that President Kennedy had probably been killed as a result of the conspiracy. And they had a series of recommendations for the Justice Department and the FBI to continue the investigation after the congressional panel's tenure ran out. They had some real good suggestions for the Justice Department to follow up on areas of the case that warranted ongoing investigation. They named 3 men who they felt like had the motive, means, and opportunity to have had President Kennedy killed. Those men were James Hoffa of the Teamsters Union, Carlos Marcello, the mafia boss of New Orleans, whose turf extends on into Dallas, Santos Trafficante, the mafia boss out in Tampa, Florida. These were 3 men that were considered prime suspects in having arranged the assassination of President Kennedy. The congressional panel, had this good series of recommendations and work to be followed up on. But did the Justice Department and the FBI armed with the knowledge that Kennedy had been killed by a conspiracy? Did they go into action? Did they get the big guns out and go after the perpetrators of the crime? They didn't do anything. There was no meaningful action of any kind on the recommendations. And then in 1988, we found out, only through the Freedom of Information Act request, that the Justice Department and FBI had very quietly closed their books on the Kennedy assassination, saying that they could find no evidence of conspiracy. So that's the mindset that has allowed this case to linger, and the nagging doubts and the controversy and the speculation and the conjecture and so forth. All that has lingered because of the inactions of our government to adequately investigate and resolve this case when it had a chance. No, ultimately, if we do get to the bottom of this case, it will have been through the efforts of private citizens from all over the United States and even Canada and England and other countries, but mainly American citizens who cared enough about the concepts of truth and justice to get involved and try to hold the government accountable in this case. The textbook y'all are using in the course this year is Crossfire by Jim Marrs, which is one of the best books ever written on this case, one of the best overviews of what we have learned about this case over the last 29 years. And at the outset of that book, Jim Mars acknowledged what group had done the most meaningful work in terms of keeping the case alive and trying to reach some kind of resolution. Jim Mars wrote, "When a final truth concerning the assassination of President John F. Kennedy is accepted by the general population of the United States, it will have to be acknowledged that this truth came not from the government, the legal profession, or the news media. Rather, that truth will have come from the legion of individual citizens who have refused to accept superficial explanations. No one person will be credited with such a final truth, because the names of the people who have fought to learn what really happened to President Kennedy, often at the risk of public ridicule and worse, have grown too numerous to enumerate. Every citizen who gave of his time, effort, and resources to study, assimilate, and disseminate assassination information will someday come to be regarded as part of an object lesson on how the individual citizen can indeed make an impact on a system that has proven either unable or unwilling to police itself. And on that day, all of the assassination researchers will receive the public acknowledgement they so richly deserve." Tony Summers, a great British investigative journalist, wrote a book called Conspiracy, which is one of the best books ever written on this case. It's the first book I refer to people wanting to read about the Kennedy assassination and learn more about it. And it's a very good overview from an investigative journalist. And Summers, too, also acknowledged the role of the private citizens in the Kennedy assassination. He wrote in his book, Conspiracy, "Those independent researchers of the Kennedy case who work on, in spite of passing years and press mockery, set themselves a thankless task. They are perennially assailed as sensation mongers or cranks, and in some cases that criticism has been justified. Others, however, with their scholarship and persistence, have filled a gap left by poor official investigation and shoddy journalism. Their best reward has been recent reinvestigation by congressional committees, a sign that a tiny handful of citizens can still budge a resistant establishment. The best of the private students of the case, those of whom the public hears little, have been vindicated by the formal finding in 1979 that President Kennedy's death was probably the result of conspiracy. They are not yet, however, satisfied. Reasonably enough, they now press for the location and prosecution of those who plotted the president's death. And indeed, that's what we're doing at this point. We recently had a symposium here in Dallas. There were over 400 people from all over the United States and Canada. And we met, with the idea of exchanging information, finding ways that we can be more unified and more persuasive and successful in waging our efforts to try to get all of the documents on the Kennedy assassination that are still withheld by the government released in their entirety, trying to seek out possibly the appointment of a special prosecutor to seek out prosecution in this case. The Justice Department can move when it wants to. They set out 40 years after the fact to investigate and prosecute Nazi war criminals, and were successful. They only fairly recently reopened investigations into and brought prosecution in some of the civil rights murders from the early and mid-1960s, and have been successful so far. You can't tell me that the power of the Justice Department, the FBI, the power of the federal government cannot get to the bottom of the John Kennedy assassination if we can get those institutions to function as they're supposed to and be accountable to the people as they're supposed to. There's one other quote I'd like to read from Henry Hurd. He wrote a book called Reasonable Doubt. And he also acknowledged the role of the private citizen in keeping this case alive. He talked about the shortcomings of the government and the news media and the legal profession to resolve this case. He says, despite these failures, it is encouraging that it was the very resiliency of the American system that prevented the JFK case from being stifled. A band of people, lawyers, homemakers, a goose farmer, businessmen, a mathematician, an architect, scholars, secretaries, doctors, professors, a weekly newspaper editor, photographers, even former government agents would not swallow the official line. they began, each in his or her own way, their diverse work to get at the truth. Known as the critics, these people have managed through sheer diligence and persistence to keep the case alive and to inch it towards some plausible resolution. They have been denounced from some of the most prestigious podiums in the land, called blood-sucking scavengers, accused of personal greed. It is they who have kept alive the search for truth. Without their work, the evidence uncovered and the legitimate leads developed would likely have been lost many years ago. Without their work, the continuing quest for truth about the JFK assassination would simply be impossible. So, the story of the private and independent research into the Kennedy assassination has been a remarkable and inspiring story because it's a real grassroots effort. People from all walks of life. Mary Farrell, the legal secretary, that weekend, I mean that Friday and that Saturday that this happened, sending her boys down to the loading docks at the Dallas Times-Herald and the Dallas Morning News and bringing home every edition of every newspaper so that she could start comparing notes and seeing how the story was starting to change and evolve, and how it really started to change after Oswald was dead. You know, and so as far as I'm concerned, Mary Farrell, was the first one. She started that Friday, which is the earliest that I know of. And Sunday, when Ruby killed Oswald there in the basement of the police headquarters, a fellow named Penn Jones was a newspaper editor out here in Midlothian, Texas, about 25 miles south of Dallas, a little weekly newspaper in a small country town. And Penn was a World War II hero and a real feisty guy who wasn't afraid to call a spade, and he got involved that weekend. As soon as Ruby killed Oswald, he knew there was something wrong. He got involved. This theater we're sitting in is called the Penn Jones Theater. It's named after Penn Jones because he was one of the first and the most courageous to question and counter the government version of this assassination. And Penn Jones became a mentor to Gary Shaw back in the late 60s, got Gary actively involved in the case. In 1975, I was a college student. A guy named Robert Groden, a photo technician from up in New Jersey, took to nationwide television, went on a show hosted by Geraldo Rivera. It was March 6, 1975. It showed the Abraham Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination on nationwide television for the first time. It was a ballsy thing to do. And it was the first real turning point in this case because millions of Americans tuned in on that Friday night to watch that show, and they were stunned by what they saw, to see the actual film of the assassination, and see the clear and obvious evidence of the shot from the right front, not from the Texas School Book Depository, that ended the president's life. And the excitement after that, people didn't talk about anything else for days after that. And college students, all kinds of college students all over the country got all fired up and excited about that. There was a group of them up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, formed a little organization called the Assassination Information Bureau. And started going around to college campuses all over the country, giving a slide presentation and lecture on it too. And they played standing room audiences all college campuses all over. Robert Groden, after showing this film on nationwide television, took to the lecture circuit in colleges, and there was tremendous response and enthusiasm among young people, and started signing petitions and lobbying the Congress. The Assassination Information Bureau set up in Washington, D.C. and started lobbying with senators and congressmen. Bud Finsterwald, the Washington attorney who helped draft the Federal Freedom of Information Act, which has been a godsend to researchers on this case, used his influence to meet with senators and congressmen and lobby for a new investigation. In 1975, things started happening. The Senate Intelligence Committee was doing an investigation. It was disclosed that the CIA in the early 1960s had entered into a partnership with organized crime with the objective of assassinating Fidel Castro over there in Cuba. All started to come out, and all these disclosures about CIA abuses and illegal activities and covert operations and assassination plots against foreign leaders. At the same time, all these college students going around showing these slides on the Kennedy assassination, film presentation, giving lectures, getting petitions signed. And Lord, it was an exciting period. And the outcome of that was Congress so deluged with letters from the public, and pressure from the news media and historians, even alumni of the Warren Commission, some of their staff people, that they had no choice but to reopen the investigation. And they undertook a 2-year investigation. When it was over and done with, they concluded that President Kennedy was probably killed as a result of the conspiracy. They weren't able to identify the extent of the conspiracy or who the other participants were, but they set up a list of recommendations for the Justice Department to pursue those. And as I told you, they didn't do it. And Mary Farrell here was instrumental in that panel's conclusion that there had been a conspiracy there in Dealey Plaza. She's the one that got the committee to study the Dallas police radio tapes and encouraged them to use the latest scientific advances and technology to study these tapes, because a Dallas policeman's radio microphone had been stuck open during the assassination for a several-minute period. And it turned out that the shots there in Dealey Plaza had been recorded on this tape. You couldn't make them out because of the run of the motorcycle, but with the technology that had been developed, they were able to go in and study these. They did a big acoustical study in Dealey Plaza and put it all together and concluded that they picked up impulses that they identified as gunshots, and they determined that a fourth shot had been fired from the grassy knoll. And that came about because of the efforts of a private citizen. So it's just it's really been a remarkable story how people, just private citizens from all professions, all walks of life, all ages, political persuasions, have gotten involved and kept this case alive. The other turning point in this case was the film JFK when that came out, and I'd like to just give you a little background on that to show you how people can make a difference. Penn Jones was my first mentor on the case. He got me involved just as he got Gary Shaw involved. He'd take me around with him to lectures, radio talk shows. We'd go interview witnesses. And I remember 1975 saying, well, it's been 12 years. It's been 12 years. What can we do at this late date? What can be done? That's how naive I was. And Penn assured me that there was enough work to be done to keep generations busy, working on this case. And he said, we're going to need young people to come behind us older folks and keep this case alive. And he took me under his wing and got me involved actively in the case. And he introduced me to a guy named Gary Shaw over in Cleveland, Texas. Gary was an architect, had his own business. He compiled quite a bit of research and had a good idea of doing a book, which he conceived as a primer on the Kennedy assassination, a guide for the layman that would lay out pictures, and photographs, and documents, and really just be a book that any layman could pick up and go through and really start to understand what the problems and the controversy are in this case. And Gary Shaw didn't have time to do this with his own business, and I was a journalism student in college, so Penn Jones linked me up with Gary Shaw, and we collaborated on a book that was called Cover Up, which was published in 1976. And this was a little grassroots effort because Gary Shaw paid for that whole thing from start to finish out of his own pocket to have that book published. And it was limited to 3,000 copies and was sold by mail. And over a period of several years, largely through word of mouth, that book sold out by mail. And Jim Mars, who wrote Crossfire, was a newspaper man over here in Fort Worth, and he got Cover Up, and boy, he fell in love with Cover Up. He would have thought this is a great book. This is telling it like it is, and it's easy to understand. And this is a good book. And he had something with Gary Shaw and told him, you've done a great book here, and boy, somebody needs to take this and just build on it, and expand on it. That's what Jim Mars wanted to do, was just take that seed, that concept of Cover Up, and just expand on it and really lay it all out in one big comprehensive picture so everybody can see the big picture of the Kennedy assassinations, how awful the government's handling of this case was. And so Jim Mars ultimately wrote his own book, modeled after Cover Up, called Crossfire. Well, Oliver Stone, the filmmaker, read Crossfire and bought the rights to Crossfire to use as the basis for his book JFK, for the film JFK. And that film, as you know, has been the other big turning point in this case to really force it into public consciousness. And just the firestorm and publicity from this film, has been unlike anything I've observed in the 17 years I've worked on the case. It has really brought this thing into public consciousness, and it's a topic of great discussion and writing, and it has really helped keep this case alive. There's more books out here now than any one person can possibly afford to buy. And it seems like every book that was ever printed on the Kennedy assassination is back in print and reedition. So we're at a point where the American people can learn more and are showing a stronger interest in the Kennedy assassination than perhaps at any other time before. So I just want to give you those little examples of how just individuals, private citizens from all walks of life can make a difference, both individually and as a group, this network of people across the country called the critics that are still working on the case. And I'd encourage all of you who have some conviction about this case, who feel compelled possibly to get involved in this case, I'd encourage you to do so, because it's something you can do for your country, and you can make a difference even at this late date. There's still a lot of work to be done. How much do we really know about the Kennedy assassination? You've been hearing a lot about the legislation to get all these documents still in the government files released and made public. And it was estimated by the Washington Post and some other news organizations that there are still approximately 600,000 pages of classified documents still withheld by government agencies, documents which have not been seen by the public. There was a Freedom of Information lawsuit against the CIA back in the early 80s, and it was about 10,000 pages ordered by a judge to be released on the Kennedy assassination. And one of them was a CIA internal memorandum about the House Select Committee's congressional investigation. And lo and behold, the CIA internal memorandum says it acknowledged that the agency had 16 file drawers of classified documents on the Kennedy assassination, not seen by anyone outside the agency, not by the Warren Commission in 1964, not by the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the late 1970s. 16 file drawers of documents on the Kennedy assassination. What do we really know about this case? How much do we really know about this case? So in closing, I'm just going to say, if you care at all, if you feel compelled, if you feel a conviction to some way get involved in this case, do so. It's not too late to make a contribution. There's all kinds of work being done on all areas of the case by people all over this country and abroad. There's people over in England trying to research this case from across the ocean, and you have to admire people like that. So in closing, I just say that, irregardless of the passage of time, be it 29 years or 79 years, the assassination of an American head of state cannot remain shrouded in doubt, mystery, and controversy. And yet after 29 years, that remains the legacy of the Kennedy assassination. As long as a crime of this magnitude remains unresolved, our national integrity is not intact. Our historical integrity is not intact. And so I just say that, in closing, once for all, it's time to get to the bottom of John Kennedy's assassination. We're a better country than that. We should uphold the concepts of truth and justice on which our government and our nation were founded, and hold the government accountable. It's time once for all to get to the bottom of this case. Thank you all.